Hello there, my name is Jordan Leroy Hansen, also known as LeDev, and this is day 5 of the spoilers. I decided to wait till Saturday to record this to see if there was anything that got revealed overnight. That was not the case, but I just thought just to be safe and sorry and just to get this video out on Saturday and just enjoy Friday a little bit. But there were some peculiar cards that got revealed, so let's get to it. One of them is the Book Devourer. 5 and a red for a creature beast. It's a 4/5 trample, and whenever a Book Devourer deals combat damage to a player, you may discard all the cards in your hand. If you do, draw that many cards. So, one thing that you do have to keep in mind, it says may, so lucky enough, even if this does deal combat damage, you're not forced to discard your hand if you really like it. But this is not a bad limited card. It allows you to essentially get in for a damage. The fact that it costs 6 mana is a little steep for 4/5 trample, but it's fine. Like, especially if you put this in a red deck with maybe a Mentor triggers or maybe any other way to buff it, it could still go in for lethal damage. That's still a way of invasion. And if you deal combat damage and you need to draw some new cards in your hand to dig deep into your deck, that's fine. It's actually a really, really good card in Limited. In Standard or in other constructed formats, I don't see it yet. I mean, the fact that you can draw a lot of cards is something to consider, especially in decks that might synergize with that synergy and such, but there are spells in Magic that allow us to do this rather than hopefully get combat damage in with a creature. I mean, someone might try it just for funsies, but I don't think you'll see competitive constructed play. Overall, though, good card. Next up is the Loxodon Restorer, 4 and 2 white for a Convoke Elephant Cleric, free 4. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 4 life. Actually, a pretty cool common that they revealed. I mean, I don't know if this would see proper play, but it is nice to just have a Convoke target that is just a free 4 that you can get 4 life from it. I mean, 6 mana is steep, but the Convoke cost does help out a lot when you tap creatures and such. The question is, really, we have to figure out, are the payoffs good enough for Convoke to take a turn off with creatures and such? Some would say yes, some would say no. It really depends on your playstyle. But still, for Pauper and Constructed and Pauper, I think you'll see some toying with in token decks as a fun, let's see if it's good or not. Don't know if it's good. Limited, if you need a 23rd creature and the life gain has synergy in your deck, you'll probably play it. But it's more like a 23rd card. Next is the Parhelion Patrol. 3 and a white for a 2/3 Human Knight, Flying Vigilance, Mentor. Wait, what? Okay, if there is a card that's probably going to see Pauper play, it's probably this one. It's actually a nice card in Weenie style decks. The Mentor trigger is really nice. The fact that you can buff up your people who are attacking and such. It has Flying and Vigilance. Oh, also, it's really good in Limited too. Like, it's not like an absolute bomb, but it is a good, I wouldn't say a 23rd card, I would say it's just a good card to fill out your curve, especially if you are going into the Mentor aggro style of deck. Really good card. Like, a really, really, really good card. I mean, this card is not a pack one, pick one. Let me put it like that. This is like if you know you're going into Mentor and you see a bunch of weenies that you put in your deck, and this card helps buff up those weenies. But still, it's evasion. It's still a good limited card. Constructed, I can see it have potential with Pauper. One card that I would be totally surprised if it doesn't see play in Pauper, though. Piston Fist Cyclops. 1 and 2 hybrid mana of either blue or red for a 4/3 defender. As long as you cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn, Piston Fist Cyclops can attack as though it didn't have defender. Yeah, this is going to see Pauper play. It's one of those, it's a really big creature, it's a 4/3, it defends, it helps defend against most creatures in Pauper, and also in the decks that want this, specifically the give this creature double strike to attack in style decks, or even blue-red, I'm going to use Teamwork Battle Strike on this. It's a good card. Like, it's going to see play in those style of decks, no sweat about it. I mean, giving this double strike, oh, yeah. And in Limited, it's a fine card. I say don't get too greedy, just treat this as a defender, and once in a while, if you do cast an instant sorcery spell, remember in Limited you only have like 8 to 7 to even 5 sorcery spells in general, even in Izzet decks. So just treat this as though a defender that can attack once in a while. Still, really good card for Popper. Next up is the Lotlift Giant. Sits in a black for a creature zombie giant. It's a 6/5 undergrowth. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target opponent for each creature card in your graveyard. If there is a necessary need for a finisher in the Gagari style decks, this is not a bad finisher, but really, it's more going to be interesting to see its potential in Constructed. I see this more as a sealed card, per se, because the factor is you can hopefully, if your deck is around the Undergrowth mechanic, having a lot of creature cards in your graveyard, you can actually do some decent damage with this as a finisher. But on the other side of the coin, you could also just treat this as just in general, just a good finisher with the burn damage if you just like a heavy, maybe say aggro Gagari and such, and you creatures get into the graveyard, and then you just need to deal like 4 of the 5 damage or such. I mean, it really is dependent. I think this is more a better sealed card than it is in draft. And constructed, yeah, somebody's probably going to try to make some silly flicker deck with this, like have creature cards in the graveyard and then deal points of damage, deal points of damage, deal points of damage. I think it's more of a jank brew because that cost for 7 mana is steep, but we do have ways to reanimate stuff for a lot cheaper, so it is something to consider. Overall, fine sealed card. I would be surprised if its playability in draft, and I do think it's going to see some play in potentially Gagari reanimated decks as a way to help finish off games. Next is the Ledev Guardian, or Ledev Guardian. I find this funny because without the V, it's my exactly YouTube username, so I kind of find that funny. So, Ledev Guardian, 3 and a white for a 2/4 human knight, creature convoke. Honestly, this is more limited playability. I mean, the thing is, it's a 2/4, so if you are kind of like in a Selesnya style deck that needs to dirtle, this is just a good creature in general, especially if you can convoke it out earlier, because a 2/4 blocker helps you against the early game aggro, and it's just a nice creature in general. Plus, that art is amazing. Standard or constructed playability, I don't think so. I was going to say maybe, but I think it's an absolute no, especially since we're going to have cards like Lava Coil in the meta and such, so... so, yeah. I mean, it's definitely tempting to say Trident Popper, but we need a lot more beneficial things than just a 2/4 in Popper. But overall, going to be a fine limited card if you need a Dirtle. Plus, that art is pretty nice. Plus, it's hilarious with that, kind of close to having my username on YouTube, so that's kind of funny. Next, a really... this card. Disinformation Campaign, 1 in Demir, blue and a black. It seems like Demir are getting all the good toys this set. When Disinformation Campaign enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and each opponent discards a card. Here's a hint. When they always say each opponent, this is essentially them saying, hey, this is a card for a commander. Or a brawl, essentially. Each opponent discards a card. Whenever you Serviere, return Disinformation Campaign to its owner's hand. Overall, let's talk about Constructed. This is probably going to see play if a Serviere commander deck kind of works, like maybe in a Lazlov deck, or maybe any deck that tries to benefit a lot with the Serviere mechanic. And if that's the case, like in Brawl or Commander, this card's really good. It allows you to get a card draw and let everybody discard a card, and the fact that you can recur it when you Serviere is pretty nice. In Limited, I don't know. In Limited, this is one of those cards where this is essentially just saying, hey, you cycle, and the opponent discards their worst card. So, I mean, there might be circumstances where that is absolutely 100% necessary, the optimal play, but I don't know if I would want to play this over, say, removal, or say a creature in Limited, so... maybe? It's a maybe. Like, if I need, like, a 23rd card, and there's not any good creatures to put in the deck, maybe. And I also have a lot of Serviere. That's probably the main ticket for this card. Besides that, Constructed, I can see somebody trying to mirror shenanigans with Serviere and such, and maybe trying to use this as a way to discard cards. On the other side of the coin, there are a lot more better discard cards in the meta, so, even with the cycle ability in general. but overall, interesting card. Next is Enhanced Surveillance, 1 in a blue for an enchantment. You may look at an additional 2 cards each time you surveil. Wait, what? 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 And then you can exile Enhanced Surveillance to shuffle your graveyard into your library. This card is... What the heck? Okay, so here's what this card is essentially saying. It's saying that anytime you Surveyor, like let's say Surveyor 1, instead of looking at 1 card, you can also look at like 3 cards. Or something like, say, Surveyor 2, you look at 4 cards. Or maybe Surveyor 4, you look at 6 cards. Is this card good? Oh my, it is ridiculous. It is ridiculous in Dimir Surveyor decks. It's... I usually am not a person that would encourage playing enchantment style cards that do nothing when they're played at the during limited. But if you have a lot of Servier or even reanimation with Servier and such, or have a Servier strategy, this might be not a bad pickup, because the fact that you can look at additional cards and allows you to dig into your deck more efficiently, that's absurd. I'm almost tempted to say that this might see constructed play. It's hard because this is going to fight against Search for Azcanta, and let's be frank, Search for Azcanta is going to be the play no matter what. But if they need another way to dig into their deck a lot more, this card does it. Plus, it's not just useful for the dig. You can also just exile and shuffle your graveyard into your library. Which, if you're going against maybe a mill strategy, or if you're going against a strategy where they make you discard your best piece, maybe it's just best to do that and shuffle your graveyard into your library to help continue on the game. This card is... Like I'm making the joke, it seems like Dimir are getting really all the cool tools of the set. It's just absurd. It's a good card. I would be surprised if it doesn't see constructed play, but it's definitely tempting in draft if you have a lot of Servier, but just know how your playables are. I'll put it like that. Still, really, really cool card. Next, another Dimir card. Surprise. Dimir Spybug, blue and a black, Flying Menace. Whenever you Servier, put a 1/1 counter on Dimir Spybug. Honestly, if this is just a 1/1 Flying Menace, it's not amazing. I mean, it's a good card still in general for 2 mana. And the fact is, if you have a Servier strategy, like if you have a lot of Servier spells, you can make this bigger and bigger and bigger. It's still prone to removal, so keep that in mind. But in Limited, this should be a fine card. In Constructed, I don't see it. There's a lot of removal, like Shock and such, so I would be surprised if this sees play in Constructed. I highly, 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 highly doubt it. Who knows? Maybe if that blue-black Tempos kind of Servier deck I've been thinking about is a thing, maybe this card would run it. It's interesting at the very least. I mean, it's more a limited card, I'll say that. I would be surprised if it sees constructed play. Next, a card I can read and actually mispronounce again. Yee! Maximizar Evosete. Red Jumpstart spell. Target creature gets +1/+1 in haste until end of turn. So, yeah. It seems like all the cheap Jumpstart spells are just combat tricks. And honestly, this is not bad for limited. I mean, it's more like a 23rd card, or maybe if you're playing an aggro deck and you need to get your creatures to attack that are really buffy, but still would be nice if they have haste. This is not a bad card, because essentially it's saying 2 red mana to give 2 target creatures as long as you discard a land for the second time. It's not bad. Or discard any card if you think it's not good at the moment. It's not bad. I would say it's a good card. It's definitely a good combat trick in Limited, and I can even see some Janky Brew in Standard with aggro-style decks that might want to run this card. It's a good card. Plus, the art is great on that. Next, a Mythic of the set. Tristani Discordant. Free and green and a white for a legendary creature Dryad. It's a 1/4. Other creatures you control get +1/+1. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 white social creature tokens with lifelink. At the beginning of each end step, each player gains control of all creatures they own. Honestly, okay, let's go through Limited. This is a fine Limited bomb. Like, if you are playing the Convoke deck, this is actually nice because it buffs up your tokens. And if there's any, like, Act of Treason-like effects in the meta and such, the fact that at the beginning of your end step, If they're like permanent trees and effects, you can gain back control of your stuff. It's actually nice. I think this is more. This last clause is more for commander, if I'm being honest, since there's a lot of people that have steel creature type of cards in their decks. So it is actually nice to have this effect kind of on a creature in itself. Also, pretty much Anthem effects are something never to underestimate because Anthem effects can be particularly absurd, so keep that in mind. And the fact that when it enters the battlefield, it creates two white soldiers with lifelink, which protects itself, which is very nice as well, which are going to be 2/2s. It's a really nice limited card. I'll say that. I think this is potentially. It's not like an amazing bomb, but I do think in the right deck it can be very bombish, especially if you are a go wide deck. Now, in Constructed, I can see some people trying this in Commander and Brawl because those effects are actually very tempting. In Standard, honestly, Anthem effects are nothing to sneeze at, especially permanent Anthem effects. We are still in a removal-centric meta, so you gotta keep that in mind, so this could get easily removed. But if there are cheap ways to help protect our creatures, I could see this have potential to see in play in Standard or even other constructed formats, but it's an absolute kind of maybe. It really depends on what type of protection spells that we have in the meta to protect our creatures against removal spells. Like, unless we don't get a don't get a blossoming like defense card in the set, or even in the meta in general, then I would be kind of surprised if this card seed play other than maybe a potential finisher. Maybe. Next up is the Creeping Chill, free and a black for sorcery. Creeping Chill does free damage to each opponent, and you gain free life. When it is put into a graveyard from your library, you may exile it. If you do, it does the same thing again. So, overall, this is a really cool design card. Like, it's one of those where it's kind of a free effect if it goes to the graveyard, such as, hey, you could Serviere this and just get the effect off for cheap. That's potentially pretty good. That's actually kind of absurd. That could potentially see some absurd play in some instances. So, yeah, this card is actually pretty good. I think it's more of a decent 23rd limited card if you need the way to deal lethal damage. I mean, it is like deal 6 damage and gain 6 life at the best, so maybe that's just a good finisher in a red-black aggro style deck in both limited and maybe even constructed. But in general, it just also synergizes well with Serviere or helps a good combat trick against like mill decks because then at worst you just have to only activate it once when it goes to the graveyard. So, oh wait, I forgot. Blah, 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 brain fart. That was a legitimate brain fart there. You can't deal D6 damage because the second effect only happens when it's put into the library, when put into the graveyard from the library. My bad. Still, I think this is a card not to underestimate. I could see this potentially as a fringe play standard card, and it probably will say play unlimited if you need like a way to deal lethal damage. And also it's a free spell with Serviere, so I can see play unlimited as well. It's a good card. Next up, another good limited card, Watcher in the Mist. 3 and 2 blue for a flying 3/4. When it enters the battlefield, Serviere 2. Honestly, just a good limited card. It's tempting to say that this might see play in Pauper, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Maybe if a Flyers deck in Pauper is a thing and they do like the Serviere trigger. But this is more just a great limited card if you need a card for your deck that's a flyer, and the Serviere 2 is very nice. Especially if you have cards in your deck that synergize with Serviere. This is a quick one. Good and limited, might see some constructed play in Pauper, maybe standard, but I highly doubt it. And that's a card that will absolutely see standard play. Ritual of Suit. 2 and 2 black. Destroy all creatures with converted mana cost or 3 or less. Oh, this card is going to probably see play in standard, no sweat about that. Most black control decks need board wipes and stuff, and we were going to lose Bantu's Last Reckoning. But this card does get the ticket right off the bat. So it helps destroy the early game, which is probably the point, so you could save your late game control spells against late game threats. It's a really good card for standard. This is going to see play in standard, especially with how many people are relying on like Goblin Chain Whirls or Llanowar Elves or all that stuff, or Steel Leaf Champions, etc., 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 etc. Now, limited, It can see play, but you have to be very careful how to play it. You kind of have to play what is known as the sandbag type of deck. Like, you have to sandbag, wait for your opponents to play out their hand, then play this, and then play out your stuff. So as long as you know that, that's the thing with wipes, with board wipes. You have to keep in mind of that, and also be careful of being prepared to sideboard this out if you go against somebody that's more late game oriented. But overall, great standard constructed card. It will see play in standard. No sweat about that. Next, a split card, Connive and Concoct. I always get that pronunciation wrong. Connive, 2 and hybrid mana, blue and a black, gain control of target creature with power 2 or less, or Concoct. Free and Dimir colors to Servier free, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Both are at sorcery speed. This is a really, really good card. Like I said, it seems like Dimir are getting really all the cool tools. Okay, let me say why this is a really good card. I mean, let's be frank, I think most of the benefit's going to come from the Concoct side, because the Servier is nice, because you can put in a really big creature and then return it to the battlefield. You could put stuff like Niv Mizzet in the graveyard and return it back. Or like in Standard at the moment, you could return stuff like, say, oh, I don't know, Nicol Bolas, the Baravager. Return that from the graveyard. Get the discard effect, which synergizes with a Grixis style kind of reanimator mid-range deck. And if you need to, if there's a value-based creature on 2, you can use Connive in Limited. I mean, I think most people are going to want to play this card for the Concoct, but if there is a significant threat that's of 2 power or less, you will do the Connive when absolutely necessary. Overall, great limited card. I would be totally surprised if it doesn't see standard play in some deck, because that ability in alone is actually pretty powerful. Also, keep in mind, you could cast this for 7 with, say, oh, I don't know, with that Snapcaster-like spell, Mission Briefing, and then just do the Concoct side. And then Servier 5. Oh, and maybe if you have, say, oh, I don't know, that enchantment that makes you Servier 2 more cards when you Servier, then you would Servier 10 cards in your library. Yeah, that's absurd. Dimir is absurd in this set. Glaive of the Guild Pack, 2 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each gate you control and has Vigilance and Menace. Equip costs 3. Now, you always have to be careful and limited with equipment because you want to make sure you have enough creatures that it benefits this, because these are relatively slow cards to put in your deck, even with significant stat boosts, and you have to be careful of artifact removal. But this card is pretty decent if you need like a 23rd card, especially if you're running a lot of gates. If you're running a lot of gates, the creature can become absurdly powerful and could become a finisher thanks to this equipment. So, in Limited, you'll see play. Constructed, honestly, it's really dependent on if a gate deck exists, and it depends on if artifacts can actually stay safe, even though we are in like a Naturalized / Thrashing Brontodon / that new Knight of the Autumn card where your artifact's probably going to destroy it faster than you can say Timbuktu in a Bayou. So, yeah, probably not much standard play, but in the right decks, it could actually do some play in Limited. Next, Omnispell Adapt. 4 in a blue for a creature human wizard. It's a free 4, and it has an activated ability of 2 in a blue. You may cast an instant or sorcery card from your hand without paying its mana cost. Okay, this card is absurd. Okay, let's get onto this. In Limited, if you have some very powerful instant or sorcery spells in your draft pool, and you have this card, I would say play it, because even if you have a really high cost spell, you can still cast this for cheap. It is still prone to removal, because this is a significant threat. People are going to be scared when they see this card. But the card's power level is there. Especially if you can cast like a 5 cost spell for free mana with this. It's a really good card in those type of decks. Now, in Constructed, yes, this will probably see play in Commander, because there are some ridiculously absurd high-cost spells that you can activate. And as far as I'm aware, people could recorrect me on this, you can cast sorcery spells at the end of the opponent's turn as well as instant. And there's just some spells that you would want to cast for free mana that are really high cost in Commander that would be absurd. Like, Expropriate is the one I can think of right off the bat. Or even just a really high board wipe or such. I mean, board wipe's probably not good unless it's like Cyclonic Rift. Well, no, Cyclonic Rift would not be good because you can't pay the Overlord cost, so maybe stuff like in Garrick's Wake is probably the best one if you're playing like a blue-black deck in Commander and you're playing this. In Standard, I want to make this work with stuff like Apex of Power and such, but like I said, we're going into a very, very removal heavy centric meta, and unless if there's a way to give this creature haste when it enters the battlefield, and you still can have the mana up, I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to try out at the very least, and I think someone will try it because there are some highly powerful sorcery and instant spells in the meta, but uh, we have to wait and see on that one. Next, I can't read this, so, and I don't want to presume which language this is, so I'm not going to presume that. Free and a green for a sorcery spell. Search for 2 lands or gates, your choice, or even a land or gates, and then put them on the battlefield tap. Overall, good ramp spell. It's a good replacement, especially if you're playing a kind of gate-centric strategy in limited. I can also see this potential in constructed play because if you do need, like, say, any gates and such. Let me check one thing real quick because I need to make sure if it's basic lands or, yep, 2 basic lands. So yeah, if you're playing a gate-centric type of deck, this actually is a good way to filter and ramp. So in limited, in standard, maybe it depends on if a gate deck exists. So, but overall, it's a good card, like especially for limited. In constructed, we'll wait and see. Next is the Swiftblade Vindicator, red and a white for a 1/1 double strike vigilance trample. Uh, hmm. Okay, I think when people look at this card, they look at this as being a rare and they kind of tilt their head sideways. Yeah, it's a lot of keywords, but keep in mind, it's a 1/1, which feels really bad unless you realize that Mentor is a thing. And with Mentor being a thing, if there's a way you can put a lot of counters on this creature or buff it with like a combat trick, this card could be potentially an absurd 2-drop. Now, yes, it's prone to a lot of early game removal, so keep that in mind. I would say it's not good to build your whole deck around this card, but if you are going overall in a Mentor style deck, this might not be a bad pack one, pick one, and then no, you get all the Mentor and combat trick cards. And not build all around it, but still just build like a Mentor strategy in general, like buffing up other creatures and such. And then this card becomes a lot decent and limited. Constructed, I would be dumbfounded at this season play. I would be absolutely dumbfounded because the factor is it is prone to a lot, and I mean a lot of removal in the meta. Like, I would be surprised if this sees constructed play. Don't get me wrong, Double Strike Vigilance and Trample is absurd, but it's a 1/1. It can die to a shock. So keep that in mind. I say in limited if you build the right deck, but in standard or other constructed formats, I would be surprised. Next, Hunted Witness. 1 white common. It's a 1/1. When it dies, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. Honestly, this is just a good 23rd card. It replaces itself. It's a nice 1/1. Plus, the art is pretty nice. Might even potentially see Popper play in the decks that would want a card that can be recursive in a sense, especially with the lifelink sub-strategy. So, overall, good card probably in Popper. Potentially, it's not a Doom Traveler per se. It's the closest thing we're going to get to a Doom Traveler at the moment. But overall, it's fine. Plus, that art is very forbidding with the flavor text. It's pretty cool. In limited, you'll play it if you need to play it. Oh, nope. Here we go. And that's up. We're going to get to the last few cards that I missed yesterday before I ended the video. So, next one, Crackling Drake. 2 blue and 2 red for a creature Drake. It's a flying X4, which is Crackling Drake's power is equal to the total number of instant sorcery cards you own in exile and in your graveyard. And when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Great limited card if you can get the spells deck to work, especially since it replaces itself, which is very nice. Plus, if you can make this like a free 4 or even a 4/4, it's just a good finisher in general. It's a good card. It's a really good card in limited. Standard, the Enigma Drake decks are there, especially those that try to fill up the graveyard really quick, so this is actually a good card to put in the deck to help complement the Enigma Drake, which is still going to be a fiend since technically that card has been reprinted in the core set. It was originally printed in Amonkhet, but it got reprinted in core set, so we're still going to have Enigma Drake, so if those decks still exist, this is actually a good card for those type of decks. It cycles itself, it replaces itself, plus also it's just a good flyer. So overall, I could see the C play in standard and constructed, and it's also a good limited card in the right decks. Next up, all stuff I cannot read, so I'm just going to read what the cards do. It's 2 green, 2 white for a Dryad Knight. Essentially, it's a 4/4, but when it dies, it creates 2/2 Knight. Actually, let me make sure what those tokens are again. 2/2 Elf Knight creature tokens with Vigilance. Also, it has Vigilance as well. So, is this a good card? Yes. Is this going to see standard play? Probably so. It's a card that essentially is a significant threat in itself, and then when it dies, it just splits. So unless the person has like a board wipe as well, this is great for Convoke style decks. It will see play in Limited because the factor that it is like a really, really big Doom Traveler that just creates more problematic creatures when it dies. It's a really, really good card. Like, it's a good Limited card, and it's probably going to see constructed play. No sweat about that. Next, it is a 5/5 for red and white for I recall this has Vigilance, if my memory is correct. Correct! So it's a giant soldier with Vigilance, and whenever it attacks, it deals 1 damage to each creature an opponent controls. So unlimited, it's probably not a bad top-end card, especially if you're going against token-centric decks in the meta, if that's a thing. Especially those that have, like, 1/1 tokens and such. It's a really good card. But, like, in formats, like, say, Constructed, I don't know. If Enrage is still a thing in your local beta, this card's probably not really good against that. It could just be, then it just becomes a blocker because you don't want to trigger Enrage on your opponent's side, so, I think this is more overall just a good limited card, because it's a 5/5 with Vigilance, it can attack in, it's a good card in that sense. Now this one I actually haven't seen, so I do have to read this. So it's Ledev Captain, 1 green and a white for a creature Elf Knight. Whenever it attacks, you may tap any number of untapped creatures controlled. Oh hey, another Ledev! Ledev everywhere! Ledev Captain gets +1/+1 for each creature tapped this way until end of turn. And then it has 3 green and a white, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. Okay, that's absurd. Yeah, this is a good uncommon. I'm not sure about standard play per se, but it is kind of a nice that it can actually boost itself, especially if you have a lot of tokens that you don't want to swing in, and if you need to swing in high, so to speak, rather than wide. Plus, the fact that it has that mana sink ability makes it really good for limited. In standard, I'll say maybe. It's one of those, the hard thing about it is, well, like I said, removal-centric meta, and the fact that we have board wipes like, say, the suit one that we just talked about, I would be surprised to see standard play, but it is a really good limited card, so there's that. Overall, I think we covered all the cards for this week. Overall, this set is actually looking pretty fun. I can't wait to try this in the pre-release stuff. So we'll start next week with all the cards that they reveal on Monday, and hopefully just get through that and see how many videos it takes. I'll try to start on the set review after they reveal the whole set, and, well, I'm going to try a very quick way of doing it, kind of like a point system, also with a quick pros and cons of the card. It's an experimental video, so we'll see what happens. Overall, hope you all enjoyed your time listening to my opinion. This is LevDev, signing out.